Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for episode 189 of the Freight 360 podcast. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about what to do when things go wrong, whether that be load held hostage or the driver's not responding or you suspect a double brokerage. So stay tuned for a good episode. But first, welcome back. We're glad you're with us again. Got some good Q&A for the end of today's episode. Keep sending us your questions. Keep sharing us with your friends in the industry and leave us that review. This episode is brought to you by Blue Book Services. Blue Book is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce. Their online database contains thousands of companies throughout the produce industry supply chain. You can easily search their database to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit rating helps you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com and click join today. That's producebluebook.com. And as always, there is a affiliates or our recommendations link in the show notes. Check that out. And you can see all of our sponsors and affiliates listed in there. Ben, how are you this fine Wednesday afternoon? I know it's going to be released on Friday, but it's Wednesday as we record.
I'm doing pretty well. I had a rather light morning, so lunchtime I took Ava and my wife to the beach for a little bit. So not a bad Wednesday so far.
There you go. It's the sun came out today, but it was cloudy and raining this morning. We did see a little snow yesterday in Western New York.
Ooh.
Didn't last very long. It was weird. It was like in the 40s, but it was like a little bit of snow or slush or sleet fell.
Well, it's funny you said that. On the news this morning, they're expecting hail larger than a golf ball in like more than half a dozen places in Palm Beach like this afternoon. Like it's supposed to rain and I don't know how that's possible. They said it was like, they said how long it's been since that happened. It was a very long time. So,
you know what I forgot to mention? When I was down in your neck of the woods, I made a day trip out to Fort Lauderdale, like the Hollywood area. Yeah. And it was when that flooding happened. Like,
oh yeah, the airport was underwater.
Insane.
Yes, it was the whole airport was literally underwater.
Oh
like the pictures show planes on the tarmac, and the water is like halfway up or above the wheels of the airplane. It looks like there's airplanes parked in like a lake. That's exactly what it looks like. It doesn't look like an airport.
So we went to the Hard Rock, and is it Hollywood? Is that where the Hard Rock is? The giant guitar-shaped place? They got a casino and stuff there. We went there and just like driving through that area, like, but it's right by Lauderdale Airport. That's the exit we took off of 95 or the Turnpike, whatever it was. And it was insane. You could, because like the water had nowhere to go. And there's just cars like flipped over all over the place. You got people in like boats. We tried to get lunch at a certain restaurant, and it was about 4 feet underwater. So we had to go find a place down the street. But
well, to further that, the ports were flooded, so they didn't bring any gasoline into Florida for that entire period of time. So most of South Florida had a gas shortage until like now. Like the first time I've ever seen this, I went to get gas like 2 days ago. Costco's line for gas was like literally probably over 100 cars. It was like into the main road and down the main road. And then I got gas at a regular gas station, and it was coming out like literally it took like 2 minutes to get a gallon of gas. And I asked the guy next to me, I was like, well, how long have you been here? He's like, it was an older guy. He's like, I've been here almost 30 minutes. He's like, but I don't have anywhere to go. He's like, if you do, I probably wouldn't wait. And I asked the guy, and they were like, yeah, we didn't have gas for so long. They just filled up the tanks. And he said something like they either thought they overfilled them or something that was creating a pressure issue. But I'm only pointing that out was like, it disrupted everything, including the ports, including shipping coming in. I mean, if it affected gas, it affected everything that was coming in through the ports of South Florida too.
No, you're right, man. You're absolutely right. So golf ball size hail, though, that's no joke. I've seen hail and big hail before, especially out west, and it'll do some damage. So
we shall see.
Wild. Yeah. So all you folks down in South Florida, hang in there, yourself included, Mr. Kowalski. On a sports note, Aaron Rodgers has officially gone to the New York Jets, or I call them the New Jersey Jets. So all you Jets fans out there, Send me your hate, but and they're trying to say who's the best quarterback in the AFC East now. Is it Aaron Rodgers? He's good, but he's a better golfer than Josh Allen. But I think Josh Allen's got a better arm, so we'll see. We'll see. How's your Pirates doing?
Yeah, they just lost. Well, they had a 7-game winning streak, which is a hell of a start for that team. They lost to the Dodgers, I think, 2 days ago, which broke the streak. They're playing today, but it's nice to see. I liked watching baseball as a kid when they sold the team to. My mind just blanked. Probably like 20 years ago. They haven't spent any money on it, but it's a great stadium and a great place to watch baseball. So it's nice to see them do at least periodically well.
Yeah. We have Buffalo has a minor league team called the Buffalo Bisons, and every June, they do this like Star Wars theme night where everyone dresses up in character, and then they do like a Star Wars like skit at the end. And we just got our tickets for this summer for that, so I'm excited for AAA Star Wars baseball night in Buffalo. Good stuff. Elsewhere, are we coming up on PGA Championship? Oh no, we still got a couple weeks before the PGA Championship, so We'll save our thoughts on that. All right, let's give a shout out to our friends at DAT, and then we're gonna hop right into it.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you'll get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Take advantage of a free month of DAT1 by clicking on the link in the show notes.
Absolutely. So today's topic, we've talked double brokering. We've answered Q&A questions. We decided to do a full episode on what to do when things go wrong, because if things have not gone wrong for you in freight brokerage, you're probably not a very good freight broker.
You're not moving enough freight.
How does it sound to say that? It's just the reality, right? So, can you throw me out a couple of examples of just some of the weirdest stuff that you've ran into, and I'm going to give you a couple examples, and we can talk through what you should do.
I've had a load held hostage, one single load held hostage by more than one carrier on that same load. I've had them use that in that same instance. And I think I've talked about this on the show. They negotiated was originally like a $5,000 or $6,000 load. By the time it was over, it was like $14,000 or $15,000 for the same mileage because of them holding it hostage, weather. It was a whole scenario.
That was the one in Canada?
Yeah, the one going up to, I think it was Prince Edward Island during kind of a snowstorm. And the other one I talked about was there was an accident where the driver had a heart attack and then had an accident and got into the report showed after, at least the police report, that the driver had a heart attack, likely died before, but rather than drive his vehicle, tractor trailer, into the rest stop area, intentionally hit a tree, the truck exploded and burned to the ground with all the cargo on it. Was probably one of the crazier situations that I've ever been involved in.
Wow. Well, I've dealt with a little bit of everything, right? You get the hey, I can't get a hold of my driver issue. What do I do? Some of the funny ones are an excavator being moved, doesn't show up on time, ends up the driver took it to his house, dug an in-ground pool, and then delivered it.
I haven't seen that one yet, but that was a good one.
We had one last week. We had one 2 weeks ago. Load. They thought it was a load held hostage. Carrier wasn't responding. Phone lines were shut off. It was a load of tonic water. And basically the customer's like, they stole our freight. And we're like, who wants to steal a truckload of tonic water?
What is the resale value?
Things to steal than tonic water. It ended up, it wasn't stolen. Carrier, if I remember correctly, the driver just basically ditched a load at a warehouse, and they found it like a week later. I don't know if they were going, he quit or something like that, I think. But
I would say probably the more
trucks on fire. all that stuff.
I would say the probably the one that I've seen that is most common is a small load you book dedicated, and the carrier kind of ghosts you and turns it into a partial without letting you know, makes up enough excuses that delays the delivery time, and you kind of have an idea of what actually happened. Like I would say
Or
that's
throws
probably
it
the
on the
most
rail,
common thing.
right? Does the same thing.
Yeah, throws it on the rail. Oh yeah, they're check calling you, check calling you. He's fine, he's fine. Oh, he broke down. Oh yeah, transit ended up being just like it would have been on rail. That's ironic, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, those are I've seen those before too. Like we had a guy who's telling me this like 3 weeks ago. One of our agents, he had a load for the government, and it didn't need a full trailer, but it had to be a dedicated trailer, right? They weren't going to let it be a partial.
No.
So he's got this military equipment inside of a van, locked. It's got the seal and everything on it. It shows up at the delivery, and they can tell that something else was loaded in the truck because there was like dirt or something on the floor, and the guys that loaded it literally flew to where it was getting unloaded to unload it. Like that's how like sensitive it was.
Yeah.
And they're like, we loaded this. That stuff was
We
not
know.
there. Something happened. The driver legitimately took the doors off the hinges, threw another load on there as a partial, threw the doors back on there. Like insane.
Wow.
And I guess how they figured out the pins were upside down. So they put the pins in instead of top to bottom, bottom to up, bottom to top. So okay, so there's our fun little storytelling. What do you do when you run into this stuff? So I'm gonna kind of lay the groundwork here by saying that it is not necessarily what the bad news is that's going on. It is how you handle it that's going to speak volumes about your level of commitment and service to your customer. Because customers know there's going to be accidents, there's going to be weather delays, there's going to be this, that, and the other thing every now and then, right? It's not always your fault. It's very often likely not your fault most of the time. A lot of this stuff's out of our control. It's how we react and how we can come in there and take care of them and find a solution that's going to tell them, should I keep working with this person or not? You know what I mean?
And I think I would point out there's a lesson in that was probably one of the most valuable things anyone ever taught me related to this industry. And this is, I think, really prevalent with people that have a penchant for paralysis by analysis, trying to overanalyze to prevent problems, right? Which is absolutely kind of me, and especially when I was new. And I would constantly try to understand or guess or think or analyze what could go wrong ahead of time, right? Which just creates a whole lot of work for things that haven't even happened, right? And I'll never forget my manager sitting me down and he was just like, Ben, kind of the way this industry works is you've got to be confident in that whatever happens, you will come up and work towards a solution. This industry, you don't get better by predicting what might happen and then planning ahead for it. You get better at the industry by building your confidence around thinking through the situation after it's happened. And to your point, working through or towards a solution that works for everybody, right? Again, most of these things, to your point, are going to happen that nobody expects or planned for in a lot of cases, including the driver, right? In some cases, it's something maybe very, trivial, but has an impact on the time or the delivery of the shipment. Maybe they just don't want to tell you, right? Because again, they're trying to fix it before it becomes a bigger issue. And some things, again, don't require this huge blowing up and overreacting and assuming the worst is going wrong, right? That's usually the worst thing you can do in these scenarios. Creates more work for yourself before you can even start to evaluate the situation, let alone work to solve it, right?
Yeah. So we'll start with the drivers not responding to you thing, right? Because it could be in the form of they missed a check call, or they're not responding to a text, or they're not answering your call, or their GPS got cut
GPS.
off.
Yeah, GPS got cut off. Either it was turned off, or again, and we had somebody reach out to our show and say it was a driver. A few people had said, like, look, we don't necessarily turn them off. Sometimes these apps just don't function correctly, and they will shut themselves off through either loss of service, through a dead area, or whatever reason. And they're like, I'm not going to stop driving the truck to keep checking the app to keep making sure it's still doing that, right? So again, a lot of times, again, this is literally an honest issue that arises sometimes at the fault of nobody, right?
Exactly. And I think, and anyone watching on YouTube, I'm standing up now. I was getting a little bored sitting down, so I threw the desk up to the up position. So one of the things that I do, or I always recommend, is don't hide any information from your customer, right? You want to make sure your customer is up to date. It could be as simple as like, hey, just want to give you an update. This guy's GPS cut out. He is in an area where there might be bad cell service, so if it hops back online, it's no big deal. But in case it doesn't, want to give you a heads up. I can't reach them. Blah 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 blah. The sooner you can give bad news or concerning news, the better. Because if you withhold it, waiting for things to just miraculously work themselves out, you kind of look bad when you go to your customer and they're like, hey, where's this load I was supposed to deliver yesterday? And you're like, I haven't heard from the guy in 4 days. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't I know about this? We could have canceled the crane that had to be at the receiver to offload this, and now we have to still pay them at, $400 an hour for that crew or whatever it might be. So,
hey, speaking of which, that actually happened to me 2 months ago. That exact scenario. In the scenario, it happened the same day. There was issues at the rail. The carrier wasn't letting me know. They told me like late in the morning that they had issues all morning. So I didn't find out till 11. And it was like a 3-hour transit from the rail to be at the appointment by like lunchtime. They didn't tell me until lunchtime. And on top of that, my customer didn't tell me there was a crane on site or that one would even be needed to unload. And then once it all blew up to a head, the receiver's screaming, the customer's yelling, we're paying $700 for an hour for a crane that they didn't tell anybody about, on top of the fact that the same thing happened with the carrier and created an issue for everybody, right?
Exactly. And I've used this phrase before, but it's, bad news gets worse with time, right? So had you called and said, hey, I can't get a hold of this driver, I don't know if he's ghosted me or what, and they could say, hey, that's fine. We're going to cancel the delivery appointment until we know for sure because X, Y, and Z. Had you never had that conversation, you wouldn't have been able to avoid that. The commodity could be lumber, and it's not time sensitive. They can deliver the next week or whatever for all they care. But if it is something sensitive and they don't have a heads up on it, and then you drop that bomb on them 3 days later, you're going to be looking really bad as far as your communication and updates for them. So,
well, here's the ironic thing with that situation. I think this is helpful too with the current market we're in, was when you're in a market where the shippers are trying to cut every cost to push prices down, right? We're in an environment now where I would say price is more important than service. Last year in 2021, service was more important than price because the capacity was
give me a
tight.
truck, right? That was it.
Now we're in the price is more important than service temporary point before it kind of pivots out of there. And again, in that scenario, like my customer was trying to save $150 on a pre-pull, meaning the container could have been pulled the day before, to your point, and could have been literally arriving whenever they needed to. But rather than make that known to anybody, they just said, no, pull it and deliver the same day. Didn't tell us there was a crane so they could save the $150. Now, what happened was that bill ended up being like $2,100 on the crane to save $150, right? So that's why you've got to ask very specific questions when you are getting loads to make sure this isn't happening, right? Because again, I got brought into it, and then I was somewhat culpable because I didn't say it at the beginning. Hey, do you need a crane or anything to unload this? And the reason we didn't was because we delivered that facility a lot, and there's never been a crane needed. This was a one-off piece. But that's why you always need to make sure you're asking all these questions when you're taking any load, especially from a new customer, because you need to be aware of these things up front. It's just cover your ass. It's CYA, right?
Yeah. And one of the things I'll say is, so some people, when they don't get updates from a driver, they immediately are like, I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to call their insurance. But the reality is, if you just have like a compassionate conversation with them or the dispatcher and say like, hey, I haven't heard, blah, blah, blah. Nothing too crazy here, but just want to make sure, is everything okay, right? Put yourself in their shoes. It could be that the driver's sick and had to pull over and get better, and they're embarrassed to tell you that that's why they're going to be late. Or they blew a tire or broke down, and they're embarrassed to tell you.
Well, let's back up a second, right? What is the real reason, right, that you would think anybody wants to hide bad news, right? To your point, it could just be that they just think they can fix it and don't and want to save face. It could be they're embarrassed. It could be that when you book the load, maybe tensions were high and they're worried you're going to yell at them. It could be a lot of things, but
Yeah.
what they all have in common are really just fear, right? So
Yeah.
again, if somebody isn't telling you something for fear, the worst thing you could do is just keep calling them and leaving angry voicemails because that certainly isn't going to make them more comfortable to tell you the truth, right? Like
Think about
it's
when a
just escalating the
telemarketer calls you
situation.
10 times. Are you going to call them back? Hell
Yeah.
no.
Exactly.
So,
But again, to your point, one of the easiest way to solve most of these issues is to literally just make the phone call and do it compassionately. Like I'll usually leave this voicemail like, "Hey, I didn't get a chance to check in on the driver. Last check call was yesterday. It looks like the GPS is off. But hey," and I'm calling the dispatcher and I'll leave a voicemail like, "Hey, can you give me a call back? I honestly want to make sure our driver's okay and to make sure nothing happened." I don't make it anything about the cargo. I don't make it anything about the thing. I make it about caring for the other human being. And if
yeah.
you can deliver that message in a genuine, authentic way, most of the time the dispatcher will call you right back and be like, "Oh no, hey, he's okay. We had I don't know, we had an engine issue, we had a breakdown issue, we had a tire issue, whatever that is." Again, if you come in just like nobody wants to tell their parents when they did something wrong as a little kid, they'll tell the parent that's least likely to yell at them, right? That's who's going to find out first, usually.
That's a
It's
good
the same
point.
thing
Yeah.
here. It's you go in like, "Hey, look, it's okay. Just tell me what's happening so we can both work on a solution together. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out," right? De escalating it is your best first step.
So let's talk about breakdowns, right? So carrier does break down, they tell you about it, and it's going to cause a riff. I'm going to say first thing, I'm definitely letting the customer know. Like I said, I'm going to always go back to keeping my customer in the loop and having 100% transparency. Because you could look at options like, does this carrier have another power unit they can send to take over? Or do we have to cross dock this and find a new carrier to pick up the freight, right? And
Yep.
you could talk to your customer about the different options and say, here's what happened. The original carrier, they can repower it, but it's going to be, we're going to see a day or two in delay, and they might say that's fine, don't worry about it. But they might say no, it's got to arrive at its delivery time. Go ahead.
So, question, and I want to take you through this because you briefly went over them. I want to unpack each one of those. So, truck's broken down, truck can't drive, trailer's full, right? So, what insurances do you need to make sure they have before you can look at the transloading option? And what insurances would you need to see about repowering the same trailer? What comes into play
Well,
there?
okay, so I mean, if they're just going to repower the same trailer with their own truck, that there's nothing special. But
So,
you're alluding to trailer interchange, right? So if
yes.
a trucking company is going to haul equipment that they don't own, that's where your trailer interchange insurance comes in, right?
Hmm.
So it's covering the actual trailer itself, not the cargo, because they're going to have their own cargo insurance. But if let's say I've got somebody, it's very common, right, to see like 25K in trailer interchange, right? I'm going to haul a leased or someone else's borrowed dry van. Trailer interchange insurance covers damage of whatever your policy amount is on that person's equipment because it's not already covered by your own policy. So that's what that interchange is for. Um,
So I
you
want
could
to unpack
see,
that too. I just wanted to
yes,
restate that, right? So carrier A breaks down, calls you. You can have carrier A send another of its own trucks to move that trailer. In that scenario, you don't need to do anything or need any insurance.
correct,
Now,
because
if
their equipment's already covered under their policy.
yes. Now, in the second example, you book a power only. Carrier B sends just a tractor to go pull Carrier A's already loaded trailer to the destination. In that scenario, you would need trailer interchange because trailer interchange is what ensures the second carrier to drive the first carrier's trailer. The cargo inside the trailer is covered by Carrier B's cargo policy.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yep. And you could see a situation where you might have a wrecker. So, like those big tow trucks that haul semis might be the one that's getting everything moved, the broken down equipment and whatnot to get everybody to a safe place or a warehouse to cross dock it.
Can I ask you something else?
Yeah.
So do you need carrier? It's been a long time since I've been in that situation. Do you need carriers A's written permission before carrier B can pull carrier A's trailer?
Yeah. they need
And
to
how does that
agree
come
to it.
about?
And so there's a trailer interchange agreement
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, so there's an insurance. There's two pieces there. You should have an agreement in place and the insurance, right? The same way that us as brokers, when we go to hire a carrier to haul our customers' freight, we're going to have a broker carrier agreement and we're going to verify they have insurance. Same thing goes with a trailer interchange. You want to have an agreement with the parties involved and the insurance to cover the non-owned equipment there.
So what does that look like? Do you have an actual agreement on file you send, or is it just an email? Hey, carrier A agrees that carrier
We
B
do an
will.
actual trailer interchange agreement each time it happens.
Okay.
So we have like a template that we use, and we'll fill it out on those like case by case basis. We'll do that, but we do the agreement and the insurance every single time.
So if somebody doesn't have this agreement, can they get one through the TIA? Or how would they go about doing
TIA
this?
should have a template. We might even have one on our website, but TIA has a lot of good sample contracts. If you're a member of TIA, check them out on that one. But yeah, definitely want to have that.
Okay, so what if carrier A says, no, Nate, we don't want anyone to pull our trailer. I'll have it fixed in 2 days. And the customer says, it still needs to be there Friday. Let's say it's literally Wednesday and they got 2 more days of transit. It's supposed to be there Friday. They're broken down.
They can have it, just get it. If they don't want anyone else to haul their trailer, they can just have it towed to a warehouse and offload it. And then you'll find another company to come in and get loaded up there. So now you're paying carrier one a little bit, if anything, for what they did before they broke down. Then you're paying warehouse for storage and cross dock fees. Then you're paying carrier number 2 for picking it up and delivering it for you. So that's kind of their options, right? It's like carrier, like, do you want someone else can you get me another truck? No. All right. Can I have somebody else come in power only and haul your trailer? No. All right. Well, then you need to get towed to a warehouse and drop this stuff off so I can find a new truck.
So next question, and I kind of remember how this plays out, but just to continue with where we're at with it. Okay. So in that scenario, carrier A has their truck towed to the transloading facility. That transloading facility loads it into the second carrier that you booked. How do you handle how much you pay carrier A? How do you deduct the warehousing fee for the transloading, and how much you pay carrier B? Do you remember?
Man, that's such a great question because that's literally every time it happens, I go through on a case by case basis. Because did they break down 5 miles down the road? Were they 50 miles away from delivery? How long was it? If they broke down due to their own negligence, like poor maintenance, usually you're going to deduct. Well, we'll give you an example. Let's say you got $3,000 in this load, right? You agreed to pay them $3,000. Well, now it's going to cost you $1,000 to get the new carrier because they have to haul the last leg or whatever it is, and $500 for the cross dock. Well, now you're going to deduct that directly from that original carrier's pay. So now instead of $3,000, they're getting $1,500. So that's one way to do it. Now, the other question is, what happens if we don't have enough money in it and we've got to pay a truck and a warehouse? Well, that carrier's not getting anything, and then you end up taking a little bit of loss. But that's part of what we own as brokers when we vet carriers out, right? Do they have well-maintained, newer model year equipment, or do they have a history of poor CSA scores and being put out of service for issues like brakes and tire tread and things like that, right? And that's all part of our job. So
I want to take you through the example that I had too, because I think it also helps, I think, our audience understand how to look at exactly what you took everybody through. So in my load, it was going up. It doesn't really matter, but it was going up to the island in Canada. It snowed. The first carrier couldn't finish it. They referred me to another carrier that would pull their trailer. That carrier couldn't make it through the snow and then was calling us, holding the load hostage, saying, you got to give me an extra $1,500 to take it to my yard. It's snowing too bad. And then called us again, got another $1,500 because they had to take another road. And when I called our ops department, I said, how do I handle this? Because if I don't just agree to the rate con, like they're holding, and this is like a $500,000 shipment. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
clearly the bigger risk is in the cargo, not in the rate con. Well, what do I do? And the way we were advised to handle it, the way I handled it was you just agreed to what they were basically blackmailing you for. Like, hey, I'm holding this until you get me this. They're like, just keep sending the rate cons. So we sent the rate cons until the load was delivered. But then what happens, and a lot of bigger companies do this, you can see in the TMS money on the books to the carrier. Because usually some of these carriers that you use have run enough lanes or loads with you that you literally almost always owe them money. And that's where
Yeah.
it plays into the scenario if you have to short pay it. So what happened was, let's just say that Raycon went up to $15,000 for that load, right? Well, if the second carrier finished it and the first one didn't finish it, we looked at the miles to figure out what you would owe them for what they drove. And then we added in the transloading fee because, again, it was the first carrier's issue that required the transloading. So it was deemed that they were responsible for the transloading. So we paid carrier B what they were owed. It is deducted. Everything else was deducted out of the rate con before we dispersed payment. So they invoiced us for 15 grand, but when we paid them, to your point, we deducted what we paid the second carrier, we deducted what we paid the transloading fee, and then we deducted all the miles they weren't driven and just paid them for the miles they actually drove, right? And that
Yeah.
was what we paid. Now, again, that can later be disputed maybe in courts, but that's usually how that process plays out, where if the first carrier is responsible, they're not getting their full rate, and then you pay the second carrier a full rate either. And usually the
Yeah.
transloading is responsible for the first carrier, which helps give you leverage in getting them to do it an easier, cheaper way to begin with, right?
I've seen it too, where it's a little different. But if someone's basically trying to like extort you for more money, and they're like, "We're not going to deliver unless you pay us $2,000 over the asking or the original agreed upon
Mm-hmm.
rate," and what some people will do is like, I'm not going to negotiate with terrorists, right? But the reality is, you could just send out a rate confirmation that they want to see, and then when you go to pay them, put a deduction in there for whatever fraud minus two
Well, and
thousand
here's
dollars.
the well, one of the things that I think I learned going through this process, because those were later disputed, was it's all CYA. Cover your ass throughout the process.
Yeah,
Meaning,
document
as this is
everything.
happening, type in your notes in your TMS when you made the phone call, what was said. If it's an email, upload it so you have literally everything that happened when it happened. So when you do that, if later the carrier comes back and says, this isn't right, I want to file against your bond, you can then have all of the supporting documents to show your side of why this happened, when it happened, and why you came to the conclusion you did, right? If you don't
Yep.
have any of those documents, any of it documented, it's just your word versus theirs, and it's likely going to cost you at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's finish up with double brokering. We've got some full episodes on this, so make sure to check that out. But what I would tell you is if you think you might be part of some kind of fraud, like double broker, triple broker, whatever, you suspect that whoever you hired isn't the one that's actually hauling the load. And I'll give you examples, right? Broker in our company happens to live near the delivery for one of his loads. He books 3 trucks, all hauling into the same facility, decides I'm going to go show up and I'm going to be there for the unloading for the customer. Not a single one of those trucks that showed up at delivery was the truck he hired, was the truck company that he hired. So he knew he was double brokered, caught it before he paid anybody out, but immediately froze pay on the original carrier that he hired, got the information for the correct carrier, and figured out how to get them paid and then report the original fraudster. But that's not always the case. You might get to a situation where they get away with it, and you find out 2 months later, your customer calls you and says, "Hey, I got this carrier calling me demanding that I pay them for this shipment. We already paid you guys for this. Take care of this for me," right? Now, legally, and we've talked about this before, it is the customer's legal requirement to pay whoever transported their goods. So you could, as a broker, say, "Well, screw you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. You got to pay them, and you're going to lose a customer over it." So the reality is, we pay as brokers. We take a hit and we pay them. So what you do in that situation is let your customer know exactly what you found out. Like, yes, there was a double brokering scam that happened. We're taking the loss on it. We're going to report these guys. Blah 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 blah. Transparent make sure that you're not screwing your customer over. But a best practice, if you've, to help prevent this stuff, is get your customer involved. They should know that this stuff has been more and more common lately. Have them verify MC numbers on the side of the truck, the make and model, the color of the tractor and the trailer, the driver's name, check their ID if you need to, withhold pickup numbers until they can verify all that stuff, right? But moral of the story, keep your customer informed. And if you're worried about a carrier that's maybe trying to pull a quick one on you, just approach them not with like intensity
Malice.
or threats. Right? Put yourself in their shoes. How would you want to be approached in order to give them a response or feedback? Right? So yeah, we hit on the big ones, right? You got your carrier goes MIA, breakdowns, double brokers getting caught.
I want to add something to the double brokerage thing. One of the easiest and cheapest ways to discourage double brokering is if you suspect it, right? If it doesn't smell right, there's probably something wrong. And always err on the side of caution. All you have to say is this simple line: hey, that's great. Real quick, my customers had more than a handful of double brokered instances over the past year. So they are really on top of who's picking it up. I just want to verify, can you let me know the make and model of the truck you're sending in and just what color it is? Because the guy at the dock always kind of checks and then sends that back to us. And again, just making it obvious that your shipper is looking for these things and you're aware that this could be happening. Usually the fraudster will just find an easier target rather than trying to defraud somebody that is already kind of looking over their shoulder because it's easier for them. And that's usually just the easiest, 100%. Cheapest way to discourage it.
Yep. Well, good stuff. We do have some Q&A here, but first a shout out to our friends over at Lean. Are you looking to take your freight brokerage or agency to the next level? Look no further than Lean Solutions Group. They are industry leaders in nearshore staffing for logistics companies with offices located in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of exciting positions, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech and web development, business development, marketing, customer service, and more. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best in the business. Visit their website at www.leangroup.com to learn more about the exciting solutions they have for your brokerage or agency. It's LEAN group.com. Again, there's a link in the show notes for all of our recommended partners and sponsors. All right. Question number 1. How do I handle the objection? The shipper says they only use owner-operators and they see brokers as a revolving door. I think they might have meant they only use asset-based companies. You want to take this one?
I mean, it could be.
We only work with asset-based companies, not in brokers.
Yeah, and it could be a smaller shipper that genuinely wants to work with owner-operators. Here's the thing: like almost in every scenario where you are going to try to sell somebody to work with you, you're going to run into objections. That doesn't mean they only work with asset companies. That doesn't mean they only work with owner-ops. It may be the scenario that they're currently only working with owner-ops or assets, but I guarantee you that any of those companies that are saying that right now in 2021 used any broker that could give them a truck. Whatever that scenario is usually a result of where the market is. Now, right now, you can't do anything about the market, but guess what? The market is always changing. So even if you're talking to them, inevitably, we will reach a time in the future where they are using brokers again. Some sooner, some later, right? So one of the things to keep in mind is it takes more than one conversation or one call with somebody to turn them into a customer. So you're going to need to be able to talk through things. But how do you get through this objection? I usually go with, and you've heard me say this before, it's like a pattern interrupt. I'm going to go, that's great. You probably got a lot less hassles. How long have you been doing that? How long have you guys been working without brokers? Because it's not been forever. Nobody has been able to make it through the pandemic without using brokers. So then if you can get them to actually open up and talk about it, they might tell you the truth. Hey, we did work with a lot of brokers during the pandemic. We've been trying to cut back. Our procurement team doesn't want us to onboard any brokers now. Well, that's the key word. Okay, well, that's great. I wasn't expecting for us to be working together today. I just wanted to get a little insight into kind of how your business was running. How have things been going? So that's how I'm going to pivot kind of around and through that objection to keep them talking. Now,
the other question too is, what do they do when one of their carriers, asset-based carriers, falls off.
As a breakdown.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, we had a breakdown and can't send a truck in today.
Yeah.
Or this would never happen. Carrier finds a higher paying load and goes and takes their truck over there, right? But again, that would never happen. The reality is there's most likely a bullpen of a few trusted brokers that they can go to if they need to.
Yes. And that's the
reality. Think about you. If you're a shipper, you want flexibility. You want options.
Yes.
Whether or not you prefer those options, you want to have the options.
And there isn't an asset company in the world that can reposition their assets in moments or hours to get you a truck unexpectedly in a part of the country that nobody knew. Like they've got a plan ahead of time to get assets positioned for these loads. So one, the questions you want to ask the shipper are, hey, how time sensitive is your freight? Do your loads need picked up by a certain time and need delivered by a certain time? It could be a commodity that they genuinely don't care when it gets picked up or delivered. Well, in that scenario, they really don't need brokers. But if you're talking to somebody that ships a commodity that needs picked up when it's supposed to be and has to be delivered for any reason, maybe there's a crane on site, maybe it's a building site, maybe it's a manufacturing plant that's waiting on those materials. If it has to be there, they are absolutely using a brokerage. Yep. If it's freight that can get there whenever it needs it, whenever it can kind of get there, then there's a chance that maybe they really aren't using brokers. And those are the questions around their commodities and the way their operations are that you want to ask to get a better understanding. Hey, is there eventually going to be a need for a broker? Is there one right now? Because there may or may not be based on how time sensitive their freight is. To your point, we provide the flexibility to the industry. Asset companies can never do that.
Yeah, that's flexibility and access versus predictability. That's really a big difference right there. So
and affordability.
Next question. I'm going to try to decipher this. Will a broker call a driver directly, even though the driver left with the load 30 minutes ago and is off duty at a truck stop? They could. I think the question to be answered here is how do we properly handle check calls and updates from our drivers? Because you probably get a driver that's like, I just picked up this load. I went and parked. I'm on my off time doing my 10-hour reset. Why is this guy calling me? That might be where the question came from. So the answer here is, or the solution here is, as a broker, make it very clear what your expectation is for your updates from your driver. Are you going to do GPS and it's going to ping them once an hour, or maybe it's live updates? Do you want them to call you once they're loaded and rolling, and then maybe once a day or twice a day? Does your customer need updates every 3 hours because it's urgent? It's a very important hot shipment. Just set the expectation before, but also understand that your driver does have 10 hours of off-duty time to reset their daily hours, and you're not going to get those check calls during those hours. So you should understand, if they're picking up at 8 a.m., are they going right to off-duty time until 10 hours later? Or are they going to start driving, right? Have that conversation, set the expectation up front so you have no hiccups or unexpected issues like this. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there's also a gray area where some shippers' freight needs to be check called differently. Like you could have a shipper that you really do need to confirm that the driver was loaded with the correct piece count once they left. So like their customers were like, it is SOP, standard operating procedure, to speak to the driver after they have been loaded, right, and start rolling to just confirm that they got everything they were supposed to. Now, in those scenarios, to your point, you want to set that expectation when you're booking the load. Like, hey, how are you on driver? How are you on your hours? When are you looking to do your reset? Okay, great. Hey, just a heads up. The customer, frequently needs to confirm that everything was loaded that matches the BOL. So if you mind, I'm going to give you a brief call, or in fact, if it's easier, you give me a call as soon as you're loaded. I just want to confirm you have the correct piece count. That's it, right? And again, now if you have a driver that is even going into the reset, you set the expectation that you at least need to confirm that, because if you're also doing that on his behalf, because there are shippers where, like, I know customers that I've had colleagues work with, they constantly have to send drivers back to the shipper because they either didn't get what they were supposed to, or the loading dock didn't do their job. And then the driver's pissed because they got to turn around after they've 150 miles away from the shipper to pick up one little piece. So again, when you have a shipper like that, make sure you're setting that expectation, to Nate's point, with that driver when you're booking the load.
Yep. Exactly. Communication is paramount in this industry. Lastly, for drayage, what kind of companies should I be contacting? I'm getting a lot of pushback from freight forwarders. We've talked to this before. You're the expert in it versus myself, but the steamship lines are your other go-to. What advice or anything would you add to that? So your main two customers, forwarders, and your shipping line companies.
Yeah, so we are in a very difficult drayage market because just literally the amount of goods we're bringing in is way lower than it was last year. So like a huge drop off in containers coming into the country is what's happened. Well, with interest rates going up and just the whole economic environment. And why I'm pointing that out is that's why a lot of freight forwarders are getting irritated. In fact, my customers have told me the same thing. Their forwarders are like, I am so sick of fielding calls. I don't have any more work to give anybody. There aren't as many containers coming in. But one thing I would point out that you can do to maybe make this easier, you can go to freighttos.com, and for free, you can see some of the container volumes coming into different ports in the country. Look at that first. Look at the ports that have the higher volume and call companies that are closer to the ports that have higher volumes coming in, because there's certain ports that aren't doing nearly as much volume as they usually do right now. So you want to take a look at which ports are still doing a lot. Like Houston's still doing quite a bit. The southeastern ports are doing a lot, but Long Beach is way under what they normally do.
What's that website?
Freighttos, like freight. Oh, I think it's
Freight OS.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a freight toast. Like bread after it goes in a toaster.
But you can get some really good free stuff on here if you create a login. The paid one gives you some really great stuff, but a couple of people we work with use this to just get an idea of what's going on in the container market.
I used Sonar from FreightWaves, and we get a lot of that macro level data as well. And it is good to be able to see that, especially when it comes down to take the market on the inverse of what it is now, right? If the container imports are extremely high, and your customer wants to know why it's so expensive to get a drayage move or anything really from the ports, it's because you're dealing with way, way more demand. That's exactly what it is. So if you can give your customer, because a lot of times our customers, they kind of live in their own little bubble, right? It's just whatever their specific little widget or niche is that they produce or ship. They don't really think outside of that most times. So if you can give them some insight, it's going to help you out.
Yeah, from their point of view, it's you're driving the same distance. It's the same truck. Why doesn't it cost the same amount of money now that it did last year? Well, it's exactly what Nate pointed out. Drayage is very price sensitive to how busy a port or rail terminal is. If it's very busy, you'll see really good margins because nobody can get the capacity they need. If it's very, very slow, it almost doesn't make sense for a broker to work in that market because there's not enough meat on the bone. The lowest cost providers are way cheaper than the broker margin in a lot of drayage markets. So you almost always want to look at where is it the busiest and where is it the hardest to find a truck. That's where your opportunity is in drayage.
Yep. Well, good stuff. Great questions. As a final thought here, we said it before, we provide a lot of really great content and valuable information for you guys at no cost. So to return the favor, just make sure you're subscribing to everything, leave a comment, leave a review, continue to share us with all your friends in the industry. And most importantly, if there is a product or service that we've talked about that you are going to use, whether it's DAT or Lean Solutions Group or Blue Book Services or anything else that you've heard on the show, make sure to let them know. Either use the link that we have on our recommended products and affiliates page, or let them know you found them through Freight 360. It helps us out, helps the channel out, and it allows us to keep doing what we're doing at no cost to you guys.
Yeah. The content's actually not free. It's just that the only cost we ask you to pay is to take a moment and to write a review or subscribe to the YouTube channel, right? Because that helps us create more, to give you guys more of what you guys enjoy and to answer more of your questions and to really just put out more great content.
Absolutely. Well, good stuff. Oh, next week, we're going to have Paul from Freight Caviar on. It's going to be a fun episode.
I'm looking forward to it. That's going to be a really good one.
You guys like Freight Caviar and all the memes and the newsletter that they put out. definitely tune in for episode 190 next week. We'll have Paul on to tell a little bit about his story, but also about some cool, exciting stuff that's coming up with him and Freight Caviar. So stay tuned for that one.
Yeah, looking forward. It's going to be a good episode. That's it, man. Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.